24 hours. Now, reportedly, Russia has also launched attacks against Ukrainian command posts, foreign liaison units and drainage facilities. Now, according to the governor of Leningrad region, a fire has been put out at the Kirishi oil refinery in Russia's northwest, which is one of the country's top 2 oil refineries. This comes as the Ukrainian military has confirmed attacking the refinery. However, no injuries have been reported at the site. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian military intelligence agency has also claimed to successfully hit a different target in Ufa, the capital of Bashkortostan Republic within Russia, stating that it caused significant explosion, damaging critical production equipment. The head of Bashkortostan Republic has confirmed that an oil refinery was hit in the region by 2 drones, which caused the fire but did not result in any casualties. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Pathikrit Pain, a strategic and international affairs expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. It's interesting that Ukrainian military has now come out and claimed that it has targeted an oil refinery in Russia. This follows statements made by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and appeals that he made to other NATO countries, the G7 and the G20, in order to impose tariffs on countries purchasing Russian oil. What do you make of the fact that energy infrastructure is being targeted?
Good afternoon. Small correction, it's Pathikrit Pain. Secondly, let's put it this way, the war between Russia and Ukraine are showing no sign of any kind of reduction in tension, and it is only going to go up. Today, Ukraine has far more offensive capability, having been given by the NATO member countries to strike deep inside Russia and especially target critical infrastructures. On the flip side, the more they target the refineries of Russia, the more Russia will be compelled to export more crude oil to countries like China and India for refining of that oil and for export to other countries. The way America is talking about complete halt of supply of Russian oil or procurement of Russian oil, I think it is not feasible, because if that eventually happens someday, the price of oil would go up in a cataclysmic manner, which may potentially raise the price of oil even to $150 a barrel or $200 a barrel. So on one hand, we witnessed that President Trump talks about halting the war, but at the same time, even as he talks about reducing Russia's capability to continue the war by imposing more tariff and sanctioning countries who buy oil from Russia, and pleading with NATO to put similar tariffs. But at the same time, we witnessed that United States and other NATO member countries keep on arming Ukraine, no more with defensive weapon systems, but offensive weapon systems, which are only going to increase the quantum of the conflict, and that may even breach the territorial borders of Ukraine and reach its countries in the vicinity, which are critical NATO members and are repository to the depot of arms from which the supply eventually reaches Ukrainian armed forces. So what we see indications of some Russian drones here and there falling in Poland or potentially in other adjoining countries like Romania. These are indications that by next year this time, we fear that the war may eventually take the shape of full-fledged Russia versus NATO, because as it is de facto, it is a Russia versus NATO conflict going on. Ukraine on its own did not have the capability to counter Russia with a mere $200 billion GDP. It is purely these NATO countries which are arming Ukraine and fighting the war against Russia. It may take a more devastating turn. Targeting of critical infrastructure eventually may have a critical impact on the global price and supply of crude oil and other related products like petrol and diesel. Back to you.
Indeed, I request you to stay on with us. I would like to, in fact, inform our viewers a little more about one of the points you've raised regarding Romania in particular. Romania is a NATO member. It in fact scrambled its fighter jets after a Russian drone breached its airspace during attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure. Two F-16 jets were deployed to intercept the low-flying drone near the Danube, but it disappeared without posing danger to the Romanian population. Now, Romania's defense minister has condemned Moscow's behavior, calling it reckless and warning that it threatens regional stability. Romania, of course, shares a long border with Ukraine and has seen Russian drone fragments fall on its soil since the war began in 2022. And what's interesting is that this is the second NATO country after Poland, which has seen such incursions. Poland, of course, took up this matter rather vociferously with other NATO members. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Penn. Interesting developments. You've, of course, stated that you see this war protracting, but I'd like to come back to the point of appeals that are now being pushed forward by Donald Trump and Zelensky. They're trying to, in a way, throttle Russia's oil exports. They're targeting China and India in particular. In fact, several European nations have now been appealed to cut down on imports, but we do know that Europe at large is quite energy hungry. It is reliant on cheap Russian oil and refined oil from India and China in particular. Do you think the other NATO countries and EU members at large would heed what Trump and Zelensky have been saying?
Well, firstly, it is very difficult for a country like India to reduce its procurement of oil from Russia because, you know, OPEC is predominantly supplying to NATO or EU countries and United States. Countries like Iran and Venezuela are under sanctions. So what options does a country like India have apart from procuring from Russia? Secondly, if India is procuring from Russia, then, you know, the nudge and the green signal actually came from the West that we should keep on procuring from Russia to stabilize the price of oil. So this is not something surprising that India is buying. And it is very difficult either for Russia or China, and either for India or China to reduce the import of crude oil. And similarly, it is very difficult for NATO countries, especially Central European countries or Western European countries, and even many of the Eastern European countries as well, to reduce the procurement of gas from Russia, because the entire energy infrastructure of Europe is Russia-centric. Now, to suddenly reduce the energy procurement would have a debilitating impact on their own economies as well, and not just for the conflict. But at the same time, if Trump administration is so much concerned about the conflict, all that it needs to do is to stop or halt the supply of weapon systems to Ukraine, and the war would end by today itself, because Ukraine does not have the capability to sustain this war on its own unless that free supply of weapon systems keep coming. Now, Trump has signed a critical mineral deal with Ukraine. Trump has asked the NATO member countries to raise their defense budget up till 5% of their GDP. Trump wants more weapon systems from the American military-industrial complex to be sold to Ukraine. And then he wants the war to be stopped by putting tariff on countries who buy oil from Russia. I think there is a certain amount of hypocrisy and double standard in it. And it is precisely because of this reason that war, in spite of the apparent display of intent, will never eventually actually be stopped, because the ulterior reason for this war is the expansionist approach of NATO, against which President Putin has talked about many times, against which even India's external affairs minister has mentioned once or twice, that unless NATO's expansion stops, unless supply of weapon systems stops, this war is not going to end. So I don't think even European Union or NATO members who would want this war, who would want Russia to be contained, perhaps from their perspective, they are still even then not in a position to stop the procurement of oil from Russia or energy from Russia, predominantly gas, because there is no other viable avenue through which they can get a sustained supply of oil. That's the problem. It is a problem of supply chain. It is a problem of sustained supply It is a problem of demand and supply. It is a problem of the fact that Russia is indispensable when it comes to the global energy market. There is no country which can replace or substitute for Russia's supply of energy. It is simply not possible. Back to you.
All right, sir. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking our time speaking to us.